Hey, what's up, Home Church fam? Today we are starting a brand new series that I'm really excited about. We're calling preventative maintenance. And you might be thinking, Ed, how are we starting a brand new series when you're not even here? Well, because technology allows me to record before, and now you get to see it. But in order to introduce our series, I thought it would be better for us to do it here at what's called a recon center. And I'm here with my good buddy Nate, one of my best friends in the world, and he actually owns a company called the Car Company, where he buys used cars, reconditions, gets them ready to go, and then resells them to other car dealers that sell them to the general public. So Nate, tell us a little bit about this place. What do you guys do here?
We actually buy a lot of vehicles that have some small scratches on them, some dents. It's got, maybe some motor work to be done to it, and we take them and we fix them up, put them back to where they're supposed to be. We check all the fluids in them. We make sure they're running good. Run them through the body shop if they have got dents, scratches, need a bumper replaced or anything like that, and get them all ready for the road.
Yeah. Now, Nate, what's amazing to me is the series we're doing, preventative maintenance, is about this idea of taking care of ahead of time to keep things from breaking down. How many of the vehicles here would you say are here maybe because they didn't have great preventative maintenance?
Probably a lot of them. We've got a lot of vehicles that we've got one down here that's 40,000 miles over on the oil change. 40,000 miles, and yes, the motor is having issues.
It wasn't mine. It was not my car.
It wasn't Eddie's, but the customer was wanting to know why they had motor noise. They weren't sure. So yeah, we've got that. We've got ones that actually over here looks like somebody was probably texting and driving and ran into the back of somebody. The one right next to it, the little Hyundai Sport, motor's blown up. Probably the same situation. Just wasn't maintained, wasn't taken care of.
Wow. I know, Nate, I get an opportunity to work with you some on Wednesdays, going to auctions and all of those things. And there's certain fluids you always want us to check to see if there are things in there. We got to test the transmission, because one of the things that people don't do a lot is mess with their transmission fluid. And it has a lot of impact on their car, doesn't it?
That's right. Very few people change actually their fluid on their transmission. That's supposed to be done. There's a lot of preventative stuff, changing cab filters, changing your filters underneath your hood, just maintenance stuff that goes a long ways.
And here's the point for us today, that every one of these cars has a story, that at some point they were someone's brand new car, that they drove it off the lot and they were the very first one to ever own it. And for a lot of these vehicles, their life was cut short, and now they're in a reconditioning center because they got to be put back together so that they can walk out the thing and fulfill their purpose for which they were created. And I got to think, man, maybe it's not just cars that need preventative maintenance. Maybe there's a little bit more to that. So Nate, if you were going to say anything to people about the cars they own, what would you say, one piece of advice, as someone who deals with cars and deals with people for a living?
Yeah, knows a lot about it. I've been in the business for 27 years. The biggest thing I've always seen is that people just don't maintain their vehicle. They don't take care of it. They don't rotate the tires. Just the little stuff goes a long ways, and it saves you a lot of money if you'll just maintain it.
Maintain it. There you go. All right, guys, I'm almost to you, but hey, listen, I had to make one more stop before we got into service, and it's because I wanted to meet with this guy, because I'm thinking that maybe cars isn't the only place where preventative maintenance makes a little bit of a difference. And so we're here with Mark Clark. And Mark, you spent quite a bit of time at the old Rockline factory, right?
Absolutely. I just retired in November after 26 years of working at Rockline.
Wow. Now, what was your role there?
Well, here in the plant in Russellville, I was general manager for the last 8.5 years. And it was actually a startup plant when I started here. And we didn't have any procedures or processes in place. But today, I'm proud to say, we handed it off in a good state.
Yeah.
And the factory's just perking along right now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're in a series where we're actually starting it today, talking about preventative maintenance and the difference that doing things ahead of time can make to keep things from breaking down and hurting you in the long run.
Yeah.
How does the idea of preventative maintenance impact a workplace, impact a factory? How did it impact you guys here at Rockline?
Okay, well, maybe I'll just talk a little bit about my journey. When I started here, a brand new plant, no procedures, no processes. We just started up the equipment and hoped it would run. And you know what? It didn't. It didn't. No. So over time, we realized how important it was that that equipment was maintained and properly, because every time that line would go down, or those lines would go down, obviously that would cost money to the company. Because if you're not making product,
That's right.
you're not making any money.
That's it.
And even more importantly, you're not satisfying the customer who's expecting that product
Absolutely.
to come off that line. So,
and it's affecting the people that come to work, because if the line's down, they don't have a job to come
absolutely.
to. It impacts everything.
Absolutely.
So what would you say were some of the things that helped you realize, man, this is really important, and to put some of those preventative maintenance processes in place?
Yeah, well, first of all, off factories, at Rockline anyway, we have a series of metrics that we use to measure our health, the health of the business, how well we're making money, how well the people that work there are satisfied, as well as, most importantly, how well are the customers satisfied.
Yeah.
And early on, our metrics were not very good. So we knew we had to do something. We've got to keep those lines up and running. So my team got together, and we really started doing some data collection and tried to understand where in our factory where we needed to do some work. And so we learned about something in manufacturing that's called TPM, and it's called Total Predictive Maintenance. And so the idea behind the process is the lines never go down unexpectedly because they break down, but you always have a process in place, and you're always gathering data, and you can predict when the line's going to go down, and you can do maintenance before the line actually goes down. So you never have what we call unplanned downtime. We had planned downtime where we were fixing the equipment.
So what you're telling me is, you knew that things were going to happen, and so rather than waiting for them to happen, you prepared for them, and you took the steps necessary to make the repairs before the significant breaks happened.
Absolutely. And so what we were doing, we were always doing data collection. So we were always doing checks on the equipment to make sure our data was actually good, and that we got better and better over time to actually predict when the equipment was going to fail. And so we actually did the predictive maintenance before that failure happened.
Wow. I got to tell you, this just makes me wonder, is there more that needs preventative maintenance than just cars? And maybe there's more that could use preventative maintenance than just factories. Now listen, Mark, maybe you're speaking to some business owners right now that don't have a preventative maintenance thing in place, or what would you say to those guys about some of the things that they might want to consider?
Yeah, I think it's always important to check the health of your business on a regular basis, and do it in a proactive way as opposed to a reactive way. Because when you're proactive, then you have control over the situation. When it's reactive, you don't have control, and you're always frantic to try to solve the problem. A lot of emotions involved when that line's down. People get excited, right? But when the line is taken down in order to do maintenance in a predictive way, then it's no emotion involved. You just fix the line, you repair the product, or you repair the part, or replace the parts, and off you go. The line starts up every time.
This could be a really good series. Can't wait to get going.
Look, isn't this magic? And I'm already here, right? Like, isn't that beautiful? Technology is amazing. They were able to teleport me from that street corner to right here. Man, what's up? What's up, home church? I'm so excited to get started in a brand new series called Preventative Maintenance. And graduates, hey, man, we are so excited to get to hang out with you guys. For those of you that are with us, and some of you may be wondering, Ed, why is this the series that we're going to talk about on Graduation Sunday, where we're celebrating some graduates? And here's why. Because as Nate talked about, when it comes to preventative maintenance, for a lot of us, we think about our cars. We think about our oil changes. We think about tire rotations. Some of us need to think about our cars, right? Because we don't think about it enough. In fact, I read some statistics this week about the damage that happens to vehicles because we don't do preventative maintenance. Do you know that Americans spend $2 billion a year fixing vehicles because they didn't do preventative maintenance? Did you know that factories save $5 for every dollar they spend on predictive preventative maintenance? Did you know that there were 29 million AAA calls last year? 29 million AAA calls last year. And did you know that 17 million of those were calls that were based on things that were preventable had they just done preventative maintenance? Did you know there were 500,000 AAA calls, people stranded on the side of the road, and you know what the reason was? They ran out of gas. They ran out of gas. Like there's this little warning light that comes on. Ding, low fuel. That doesn't mean you can still get there. That means stop. Go straight to a gas station. And in fact, I don't even know if you knew this. Like you may not even know. When it gets closer to the E, that means empty, right? That doesn't mean ease on. It means you need to ease over to a gas station, right? There's this idea of preventative maintenance. And when we think about preventative maintenance, for a lot of us, we think of our vehicles. For some of you guys that maybe you work in factories, you work in industries, you work in other places, and you think about your workplace, maybe your fire, your EMS, and you're thinking about all of the things that go into making sure your equipment's working. But the reason I thought that this series, and the reason I think that this series can be so important is because have we ever thought about preventative maintenance in other areas of our life? For instance, what would happen if we took a preventative maintenance approach to things like this, right? Our house. And for some of you, you're like, yep, absolutely, you should change your air filters. And by the way, you should. All the heat and air people will tell you, don't change them. It's okay. You can pay me to come fix all the things that break, right? But we should think about it. But not necessarily this, but the things that live inside of it. What would happen if we took a preventative maintenance approach when we started thinking about these? Our families, right? Like how do we think about preventative maintenance when it comes to our families? And even more important than our families, what about this? What about our spouses? And some of you guys are like, wait, why is that most important? Why is it more important to take care of your spouse than it is to take care of your family? Because when your spouse relationship is right, everything else inside of your family can be right. But how many of you have ever recognized when this isn't right, nothing else is right? And what about this? What if we took a preventative maintenance approach to our finances? Like, what would that look like? What would it look like if we knew that hard times were going to come? If we knew that trouble was going to happen, and rather than waiting for the thing to happen and jump on us, we were ready? What if we took that predictive approach? Wait a minute. You can tell me that things are going to break down? Yep, I can tell you. And here's what I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess if you look back over your budgets, you're going to find when in the year your finances break down predictably. For me, it was every summer. I don't know why. It's because everyone was like, it's summer. We should just spend more money, right? I don't know. But I can do a couple of different things. I can prepare for it or I can react to it. But either way, I'm going to have to deal with it. And here's the question. What if we thought about how to take a preventative maintenance approach when it came to our finances? Or what about these? What about our friendships? What if rather than waiting for friendships to fall apart, we thought, man, what are the things that I need to do to make sure that I'm maintaining the friendships I have? Or what about these? What about our faith? How many of us find ourselves in places or found ourselves in places where our faith was tested, where it was in the middle of a crisis? And the first time that we began to think about our faith is when we began to doubt whether or not our faith was real and true. The first time that we began to think about it from that perspective was when something happened. And here's why I think this is so important. Because for many of us, our lives are defined by what we had, not by what we have. And the reason isn't because we never had anything. It's because how we took care of the things that we were given. How many of you can think about something really nice that you used to have in your life, but because of the way you took care of it, it's not something you have, it's something you had? Man, I had that car and it was awesome. And I didn't change the oil and the motor blew up. And now it's still sitting in the back of the church parking lot, right? That one hurt me. Too often, it's because of a story that Jesus told that we talked about last week. Matthew chapter 25, verse 14 through 16 is what it says. It says, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. And he called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. And he gave 5 bags of silver to one, and he gave 2 bags of silver to another, and he gave 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. And then he left on his trip. And the servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money. He earned 5 more. And the servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. Now, if you were here with us last week, we learned the key to this passage. We learned what God was looking for when Jesus was giving this illustration. We learned that the one that was given 5 bags produced 5 bags more. He was given 5 bags. He was entrusted with 5 bags. He produced 5 bags. And we learned that the person who was given 2 bags was entrusted to 2 bags. He returned 2 bags. But we also learned that the master gave them the exact same response. In fact, when you read through the story, that the response is absolutely identical. In Matthew chapter 25, verse 21 and verse 23, they are word for word identical. What the master said to the servant he gave 5 and what he said to the servant he gave 2. And here's what he said. The master said, "Well done, my good and what? Faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I'm going to give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." It was the same exact response, and here's why. Because what the master was interested in was not how much they were given, but it was what they did with what they had. He said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." It was about something that was bigger. And we see his response to the one who he gave 1 bag to. It says, "Then the servant with 1 bag of silver came. And he said, 'Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. And I was afraid I was going to lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back.' But the master replied, 'You wicked and lazy servant, if you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it.' And then he ordered, 'Take the money from the servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver.'" And in verse 29, he tells us why that was his response. In verse 29, he says, "To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken." And here's the point that God wants us to understand. When you take good care of what I have given you, I will give you more. But when you don't, even the little you have will be taken. And so on a graduation Sunday, when we're thinking about futures and we're thinking about directions and we're thinking about the next steps we're going to take, and it's not just for our graduates, but it's for everybody that's sitting in the room, here's the thing that I need us to remember as we walk into this series, Preventative Maintenance. Every one of us have been given something by the Father. Every one of us have been given giftings. Every one of us have been given talents. Every one of us have been given abilities. Every one of us have been given something. But for too many of us, our lives aren't defined by what we've been given. They're defined by what we used to have because of how we handled what we were given. Now, notice something that was interesting to me. It didn't say that the master was going to take it away. It just says it's going to be taken. Listen, when you don't take care of what you have, it's going to be taken. It's not that God's going to come take it from you. It's that you're eventually going to lose it. And over my life, I can think about all of these different stories that I've walked with people, and I've heard about some of the great things they have that they lost because of the way they took care of it. Like there was one person who was telling me about the little kitty that her kid had, but her kid loved the kitty so much that she didn't take care of it quite right, because she didn't let it breathe, and the kitty was gone. And then there was the little one who saved the bird and just wanted to help the bird fly. So they threw it off the roof, and it didn't fly. It didn't fly. And those are sad and tragic. But you know what? Then I think about the stories of the people who come to me and say, Ed, I lost my job. Really, why'd you lose your job? Man, I lost my job. Well, I was late. Man, I didn't show up. I was going through this. I had this happen in my life. I got mad. The manager was talking to me, and I got mad at the manager, so I responded in a way, and I lost this thing. Man, I think about how many people lost great jobs because of the way that they handled the job that they had. I think about people that have come to me about marriages that have fallen apart. And what's hard for me at this point in my life is I've been walking with people for a long time, right? I've been doing this almost 30 years. So for some of the people, I was there in the beginning when they met the person, and I was there with all of the hope and all of the dreams of getting married, and then I was there in the end when it fell apart and when they chose to walk away. And for so many of us, it's not that we didn't have. It's that because of how we took care of what we had, we no longer have the thing that God intended to be the gift or the blessing to us all along because of the way we took care of what he gave us. I think about friendships both in my life and in the lives of people that I know, and how there were some people that used to be great friends. But today, those aren't people that they would call or people that they would depend on. They aren't people that they would look to because of the way they took care of those friendships or didn't take care of those friendships. I think about the financial catastrophes. I think about the highs and the lows of people and how they've walked through life financially and how they were so excited and got the promotion and it was so great and how they bought the thing and then the next thing and then the next thing and then how debt crowded out the joy and how they were finding themselves in this completely different place. And what was the difference? The difference was how they took care of what they had. I think about the children. I think about the kids that have come into people's lives and the hopes and the dreams and what I want for them and what I hope for them and what I believe for them. And then as we go through parenting and as we make decisions, because how many of you know we're making decisions every day about our parenting, and how many of you know that your kids are going to believe what's important, that you tell them is important, and what you show them is important. And so we're watching the results of not just what we say, but what we demonstrate with our lives and the lives of our children. And then children begin to go these different, and I just think, I think, man, for so many of us, our lives can be defined by what we had. When God intended for us and our lives to be defined by what we have. Because when we're faithful with little, God says, here's my promise, I'm going to give you more. And you guys that are graduating and you're starting out and you're pushing into life, here's the deal. There are so many things you have. And you may not understand all that you have, but what you have is so amazing. And what's going to determine what you will have isn't what you started with, it's what you do with what God has given you. And listen to me, home church family. What you have tomorrow isn't going to be determined on what you started with. It's going to be determined by what you do with what you started with. Because here's God's promise. When you're faithful with little, I'm going to give you more. So, Eddie, how do we learn to be faithful? See, that's this whole series. Okay, Lord, if the only thing that you're literally looking at for me is my faithfulness with, then, Lord, how do I be faithful with what you've given me? And Jesus tells an incredible story that I think shows two different approaches to life. And I want to talk about these two approaches on week 1 of preventive maintenance. And then over the next several weeks, we're going to talk about how to walk this out in these different areas of life so that we can be faithful with what God has given us. And in this story, Jesus is giving an illustration. And in this illustration, I think we see two approaches to life. And I think they're really important. Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 through 27, Jesus is speaking. This is what he says. He says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it, everybody say and follows it, is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the flood waters rise and the wind beats against that house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. And when the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. Now, here's what's important to me. Jesus is giving an illustration of two different people who both heard his teaching. The person who hears my teaching and puts it into practice, does what I tell them, is wise. And this is a person who's building their house on stone, on bedrock, with a firm foundation. And when the storms come, and when the winds go up, and when the flood waters rise, that house will not collapse. See, what's interesting to me is Jesus is talking to two different people who both heard the same message, but they did something different with the message they heard. Some people began to apply it. And other people just listened to the words. They may have walked away and said, wow, that sounds really smart. That sounds like a great idea. Somebody should listen to that guy. That Jesus guy, he says some great things. But he says to the person who doesn't put it into practice, you're foolish. And you're building a house. Listen, you're all building a house. We're all building a house. Do you know what the house represents? It represents your life. And today, you're building your life. Do you realize that? That tomorrow your life is different than it is today, and it's dependent on how you built it the day before. Every day you're breathing, you're building your house. And Jesus said, and for some of you, when you're putting my words into practice, you're building your house on the foundation, on the rock. And when the storms come, and when the winds blow, and when the floods rise, that house that was built on my words will not collapse. But the other person, you're building a house too. And for a lot of us, we're building a house, but it's not on what Jesus said. It's not on the words that he gave. It's not on the way that he told us to walk out or live out life. And we're still building a house. But when the storms come, and when the winds blow, and when the floodwaters rise. Now, here's what else was interesting to me. The storm came to both people. See, so often we think if I just live my life this way, I'll never face storms. But I need you to understand that that was never the message that Jesus preached to us. In fact, in this scenario, he says, look, storms are going to come. The storms are going to come to the people who do what I tell them to do, and storms are going to come to the people that don't. In this life, you're going to have trouble. The difference is going to be whether or not your house collapses. And this is what was interesting to me. Whether or not my house collapsed wasn't based on what I did when the storm waters came. It was based on what I did before they ever got there. See, there's two different approaches that he talks about. One took a proactive approach. I'm going to put it into place now. Proactive means acting in anticipation of future problems, needs, or changes. I know that situations in life are going to change. I know that problems are going to come. I know that there are going to be things that I need to do, changes I need to make. There are going to be decisions that have to go on. Listen, to anybody who's not married yet and you're going to get married, I need you to know, in your marriage, you will have problems. Anyone who doesn't have children yet, and you're like, I can't wait for my little bundle of joy. They are a bundle of joy sometimes. They're also a bundle of other things a lot of the time. Hey, in your parenting, you will have problems. Hey, in that dream job, that job that you think if I could just get this job instead of that job. Hey, those friendships that you think if I could just be their friend instead of their friend. You need to know that in your friendships, in your jobs, you're going to have trouble. Storms are going to come. Things are going to happen. And the question is, what approach are you going to take? The first one took a proactive approach. I'm going to be prepared. And so he began putting into place the words and the teachings of Jesus before the storms ever took place. The other didn't take a proactive approach. He took a passive approach. And there are a lot of people who are taking a passive approach to life. And here's what passive means. It means it's acted upon by an external agency. That means you do something about your life when something outside of you happens to you. You know what? I'm not going to get on top of my health. I'm going to wait till the doctor tells me you're going to die. I'm not going to go ahead and get my oil changed. I'm going to wait till I start to hear engine noise, and then I'm going to be like, wow, what's that noise? And they're going to be like, did you change your oil? Yep, 40,000 miles ago. I did it. We're not going to pour into our children. We're going to wait for the school to call and start to tell us there were problems. We're not going to pour into our marriage and invest in our marriage. We're going to wait till our spouse tells us, I hate you. And then we're going to say, you know what? There could be a problem. And here's why this is important. Because you have an approach that you're taking in every area of your life. And here's my question. Hey, what approach are you taking? Are you being proactive or are you being passive? Are you putting the right things in today, regardless of whether or not there are problems? Or are you being passive? Are you waiting for external things? You know what? Everything outside of me is fine, so I'm fine. There's nothing I need to do today. There's nothing I need to fix today. There's nothing I need to be prepared for today. But listen to me, you're either being proactive or you're being passive in every area of your life. Hey, let me ask you a question. What are you doing to work on your marriage? Hey, last week, can we be real for a minute? Hey, last week, what did you do to work on your marriage? Hey, man, what did you do intentionally to become a better husband? Hey, wives, what did you do to become a better wife? Parents, last week, were you proactive or were you passive? Because you were building a house. In your relationship with your kids, were you proactive or were you passive? Do you know the things they're dealing with, struggling with, and what are you doing to try to build in them the things that need to be built? Because here's what you got to understand. Storms are coming. And there's going to be a moment when the flood waters rise. And when the flood waters rise, is not the time to think about what you need to do to prepare your house. It's the time that you find out whether or not your house was prepared. Because the thing that determined whether or not the house collapsed was the foundation that was built before the storm hit. The reason that a lot of marriages don't handle the storms is because of the foundation they built before the storm hit. The reason that a lot of our kids walk away from us rather than towards us when the storm hits is because of the foundation that was built before the storm showed up. And Jesus said, listen, in your life, I need you to know something. Storms are coming. Because when your house has been built over years and there's family attached and there's kids attached and there's all the financial things attached and that house collapses, it hurts different, doesn't it? Ed, why this series? I'm going to tell you why. Listen to me, fam. Because I don't want to see your houses collapse. And there are things that you can be doing right now today. And if you'll do them now, the preventative maintenance now, then when the storms come, you'll be able. Now some of you say, Ed, I put in the right things. I put in things. I tried to build a foundation. And when the storms came, you know what? It still collapsed. Remember what Jesus said in verse 24. Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it. Because listen to me, guys, there's a lot of teachings about what you need to do in your life. And there's a lot of opinions and there's a lot of perspectives. But here's what Jesus would say. But my teaching is true. And my teaching is the one that will lead you through the storm. Proverbs 14:12 says the way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. Let me say that differently. There's a way that seems right, but in the end, it leads to a collapsed house. And there are a lot of us that have done preventative things in our lives, but it wasn't based on what Jesus told us to do. No, I need to invest the right thing in my kids. I need to invest the right thing in my marriage. What made it the right thing? Was it the way that Jesus told us to walk things out? Or was it this book or this person who in your life told you this is the way that you need to handle it? Because Jesus said, listen, if you put in my teaching, if you follow my teaching, my way. And here's the problem for that. Here's the problem for a lot of us. Preventative maintenance isn't sexy. It isn't fun. It isn't exciting. I got this much money left in my bank account, man. We should take part of it and change the oil. No, we shouldn't. We should go to the movie. You know what? That oil lasted us this long. It'll keep going, right? It doesn't make us feel good, and it doesn't seem necessary at the time that their world doesn't fall apart. Now, we're going to take up an offering because it's $4,000 for a curriculum for us for a year to teach the kids. You know what conversations I would have? Why are you spending $4,000 on that? I can think of lots of things we need $4,000 to help. That offering would be a fraction of the offering of the people whose houses collapsed. Because there's something in us that just thinks about it wrong. Preventative maintenance isn't where we want to spend our time or our energy or our money. We want to build hospitals at the end of rapids. When the people go down in the kayaks and the canoes and they break in the rapids, we're like, let's build a hospital at the bottom. And Jesus said, why don't we build a dam at the top? And why don't we teach some kayaking classes? Why don't we do like some canoeing for dummies? And we're like, canoeing for dummies? That's ridiculous. Who wants to pay for that? But here's the reality. We spend $2 billion fixing cars because we didn't want to spend $59 on an oil change. And it's the same thing in the church world. There's so many of us who are going through things right now. I have people that are like, Ed, me and my wife, we're struggling. Man, let's sit down and let's talk about it. You know what? We don't have time. Hey, man, you should get some counseling. I can't afford it. I can't take off work. I promise you, I cannot count the number of times within 6 months they're like, we're getting separated, we're getting divorced. What are you going to do? We're going to try to go to counseling. I thought you couldn't afford it. We found a way. But you know what? Now it's more expensive. Now it costs you more. Now the damage has already happened. And here's the question. What are the things that if we began to deal with them today will keep us from falling apart tomorrow? Home church, what are the things as a church that if we would look at today, we could help prevent houses from collapsing in the community tomorrow? Because here's what I've found. Preventative maintenance isn't usually what I want to do, but it's always what I wish I would have done. Hey, in your marriage, how you doing? In your marriage, how are you doing? How's your preventative maintenance? In your parenting, hey, how you doing? How's your preventative maintenance? In your finances, hey, how you doing? How's your preventative maintenance? Hey, in your faith, how you doing? How you doing? Are you due for an oil change? Are there some warning lights on in your car that you probably ought to go and get them checked out before things really start breaking down? Hey, in your workplace, how you doing? Are there conversations that you need to have? Are there places where you've dropped off and you're not who you know you need to be and you're just not doing okay? Hey, in your mental health, how are you doing? How are you doing? Because here's what Jesus would say. Listen, if you'll put my teaching in today, if you'll listen to me today, and you'll begin to apply the things I'm telling you, when the storms come, I can save that house. So here's what we're going to do over the next several weeks. We're going to talk about Jesus' teachings. We're going to talk about what God's word says about how to be faithful. How do I be faithful in my marriage? How do I be faithful with my children? How do I be faithful with my finances and my things? How do I be faithful with myself? And how do I be faithful with my faith? Jesus, what do you tell me to do about those things? Because listen to me, your Father in heaven doesn't want your house to collapse. And he knows that the storms are going to come. I think it was all ladies that was graduating, right, that are here. Ladies, listen to me. Hey, would you, before you step out into the real world, away from your families and stepping away from your homes, would you just take a minute and how am I doing? How am I doing? Because you got a moment. You got a moment where you're still kind of in that safe place, where Jesus can really work on some things, and before you step over there, where the floodwaters get deeper, where the waves get higher. Because it's scary when you're in the middle of the ocean and you're alone and the storm's hit, right? And Jesus says, hey, I got you. But you gotta listen to what I say. Amen. Hey, would you guys bow your heads with me? And here's what I want to do today. As we wrap up, I want to take a minute and I want to share a verse with you. Because there are some people in this room that as I'm talking about this, you're like, wow, wish this message would have been 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 months ago. But I want to remind you of something that Paul told the church in Rome. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28, he says this, we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. Marriage is in trouble. My kids and my relationship with them, Lord, I don't know what to do. God, would you help me? Would you help me? Would you help me, Lord? Holy Spirit, right now, would you begin to speak to your people? God, would you let us know that we're not alone? And Jesus, would you begin to share with us what we need to do next? Jesus, one of the things that I love about you is you didn't just tell me what to do to keep things from failing. You told me what to do once they've fallen as well. And Lord, today we're taking the first step. We're turning to you. Lord, right now, we put our lives in your hands. We put our futures in your hands. We put our marriages in your hands. We put our children in your hands. We put our finances in your hands. And God, we ask that you would help us build our house on the foundation of stone. In Jesus' name I pray. And everybody said, amen, amen. Man, you guys are going to have to excuse me. I'm on a lot of medicine this morning, so something didn't make sense. Sorry about that. Hey, I think this is going to be a really good series. And I want to challenge you to try to be here. Next week, we're going to talk about finances. Ed, why are you telling me that ahead of time? Because all of y'all that don't want to hear it, I'm giving you the opportunity to not come. Because I'm going to tell you the truth about what Jesus says. Because he wants your house to not fall. And guys, listen to me. We're headed in some crazy economic times. And I could not fathom if my hope had to be in the government or in my employer or in something that I had no control over, that didn't love me, that was just there for something else. But when you let God lead, your hope is in him. And his word is true. And so we're going to talk about how to take care of our stuff. So anyway, I love you guys. You're dismissed. Have a great day.